Good morning and welcome to the Daily Aus. It's Thursday, the 2nd of April. I'm Emma Gillespie.
I'm Billi FitzSimons.
Vaping causes cancer. 3 words that might sound like something you probably already knew. But for the first time, we actually have research to confidently back the claim. And that is thanks to an international team of experts led by Aussie scientists. And you're going to hear from one of them in today's deep dive.
Every time I've done reporting on vaping and wanted to talk about the side effects, I've always struggled because there has never been really concrete evidence about vaping causing cancer.
Yep.
But that kind of all changed this week with this new report. So what was this report that we're talking about today?
So we had this report drop this week led by UNSW researchers, but with a whole team of experts from Australia and around the world. And you're right, we've been waiting for so long to learn more about vaping. This is a relatively new practice. Vapes have only been in Australia since about 2008. And we know that there are other harms associated with vape use like addiction, poisoning, burns, both internal and external. But this is the first time we've had what's been described as one of the most detailed efforts yet to understand the cancer risk associated with e-cigarettes. So we have this unequivocal link that vaping is likely to cause lung and oral cancer. And that really changes the conversation now that we're able to have about the harms of vaping.
And I feel like every time we talk about vaping, we often talk about it in relation to smoking, and it's often used as a comparison point. So we might say, well, vaping is better than smoking, which I know from all the reporting that the Daily Aus has done in the past that that's not actually true. And I believe that this report is just looking at vaping. It's not looking at whether it's worse or better than smoking. It's identifying that vaping in itself is an issue and we should look at that as an isolated product and behavior.
Yeah, and there's very little research that has done that or stripped the two away from each other to just focus on e-cigarettes. Now, those dual studies have happened for good reason because vapes are known to be this gateway to smoking. Smoking is known to cause cancer. So there is that natural relationship, and that's why a lot of research has gone into that. We also have decades of smoking studies. You know, smoking has been studied for more than 100 years. E-cigarettes, like I mentioned, are relatively new. So research has kind of neglected the extent to which vapes cause harm or cause cancer in their own right. And of course, there's so much time, money, effort, and coordination that goes into research. But finally, we have this really interesting report. And the study that we are talking about today was led by UNSW cancer researcher, Adjunct Professor Bernard Stewart. Bernard joins me now. Professor, welcome to the podcast.
I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you very much.
This study is making global headlines. First of all, congratulations. It's really resonated with our audience, these findings. But for those who haven't quite read beyond the headlines or seen this story yet, can you explain to us what this study actually found?
Yes, this study involved a review of all the available medico-scientific literature without any selection process as the start, and determined that e-cigarettes in their own right are likely to cause lung and oral cancer, even though we can't at this stage specify what the burden of disease is in numerical form.
A lot of our audience read this story on our Instagram this week. They saw the headlines that, an Aussie study has found vaping causes cancer, and many responded with comments such as, well, duh, yes, obviously, of course. But can you explain the importance of what this sort of research tells us? Why does it matter to have this evidence?
It matters because it's another insight into the harm that vaping might do. It may well be that in terms of a burden of cancer, the greatest disaster is amongst those who unfortunately both vape and smoke over long periods of time. That's acknowledged. What hasn't been previously demonstrated specifically, that rather than acting in concert with smoking, vaping is capable of causing cancer in its own right. And that's the specific single matter we were addressing
Yeah, I suppose we've spent many years kind of guessing or assuming that vaping was linked to these kinds of harms, but to have that definitive, confident finding, I think does open up the conversation. A lot has been said about the chemicals in vapes. I suppose this feeds into that great unknown that we've felt for many years about, what those chemicals actually do, what harm they might be causing. What are the cancer-causing chemicals actually in vape aerosols? What in there is doing the worst damage?
This is an insightful and immediate question. The chemicals that are in the aerosol inhaled by vapors, first of all, involve nicotine in approximately the same amount or greater than is inhaled by cigarette smokers. Nicotine is crucial because having inhaled nicotine, that chemical is broken down in the body. The technical term is metabolized. And the metabolites, the breakdown products of nicotine in the body, are capable of reacting with chemicals called nitrite. And this generates what are called nitrosamines. And the nitrosamine derivatives of nicotine and its metabolite nornicotine are undoubtedly carcinogenic in humans. The second aspect is metals generated by the vaporization element in itself. The e-cigarette vaporizes a so-called e-liquid, and that involves an electric current passing through a metal filament, and that vaporizes certain metals that are inhaled by the vapor. Finally, there are flavoring agents in e-cigarettes, and these agents and their breakdown products involve the production of more what are called volatile organic compounds. So this cocktail of carcinogens, all of these are inhaled by the vapor, and in terms of impact, it's not possible to say which one of those is the most dangerous. It's the cocktail itself that is cancer-causing and dangerous.
Hey, I'm Sam. I'm the co-founder of TDA. With one button, 82% of you who aren't subscribed to this YouTube channel can change that and help Australian media. Click subscribe. Now back to the video.
It's so interesting to hear it described in that way, because I guess there are people who assume that smoking nicotine in whatever form is dangerous, but hearing you actually break down how the technology of an e-cigarette contributes to the carcinogens that are being consumed is so fascinating. It leads me to my next question about the marketing of vapes.
Vapes were initially marketed as a means of smoking cessation that implicitly were better than or more effective than nicotine replacement therapy by other means. It was only subsequent to that the notion that was introduced that vaping in itself is somehow, quote, safer, unquote, than tobacco smoking. And then finally was the reality, due to marketing practice, that it wasn't smokers who were taking up vapes either to give up smoking or to replace smoking. It was kids. And these things have been marketed to children. The flavours in them, hot nicotine, bubblegum and the like, are clearly not designed to appeal to 50-year-olds who want to give up smoking. They're deliberately marketed and successfully marketed to youth. And these people are susceptible not only to the harm from vaping, but they may transition and are more likely to take up cigarette smoking.
We have a young audience. Most of our listeners will fall into a demographic that is extremely familiar with the sight of vapes, people around them vaping. We have seen a ban here in Australia since 2024, July 2024, when we became the first country in the world to ban the sale of vapes outside pharmacies. What do these findings tell us, and what is the significance of those findings in relation to that ban?
So far as I can see, the problem is not whether the ban goes far enough, but whether the ban is enforced. And that, at the moment, in my perception, is the problem. Clearly, vapes are available illegally, as it happens, through outlets in every suburb in Australia and in all the regional and remote areas as well. And what's required is not so much a further ban, but an enforcement of the regulations already in place, and those regulations are commendable. There's no question that in our free society, one would move to any situation of banning vape use altogether in the way that we supposedly do for heroin or other drugs. But we are interested, the medico-scientific community, in seeing the evidence of the type to which we have contributed in this paper being used by regulators to enforce the current regulations, which include, as you've summarised, the fact that in Australia at least, vapes are only available on a prescription.
You draw a parallel to the history of cigarettes through this research. It took almost 100 years before smoking was officially linked to cancer. What can we learn from the speed of this learning, compared to how long it took for us to have that definitive evidence? What should we take from this, and what do you want governments and policymakers to take from this to action next steps?
Clearly, we as a society, and it's not just regulators, we as a society have to avoid the disastrous situation from the late 1960s through to the 1990s or later, when tobacco companies were saying, of course, tobacco may cause harm. What we need is clearer evidence, more evidence, and we should do more research. And this notion, quote, we should do more research, unquote, was a vehicle that the lobbyists for the industry used to discourage any regulatory intervention, such as shutting down advertising or restricting sales to kids of cigarettes. Now, we have through this publication, and not alone through this publication, knowledge about the harm that vapes do. And to that extent, with cancer as the most feared disease in the population, it may discourage the use of these products, and reduced use of these products will lead to better health in the community.
You're speaking to a lot of young people right now. If you could only tell them one thing about this research, or they could only take away one piece of information from all of this about vaping and its impacts, what would you want the message to be?
I'm hoping that the young people who happen to be listening will know that there's a further indication that vapes are dangerous. Whether they're more dangerous than cigarettes is beside the point. They're dangerous in their own right, and they're worth giving up. It's known that nicotine is addictive, and they're hard to give up. That's acknowledged. Get help from your GP, your teacher, your parents, or anyone else in whom you have confidence, and they will support you in giving up this habit.
Professor, thank you so much for your time. It was great to hear your insights.
Thank you very much.
Such an interesting conversation and an important study that I'm sure we will be talking about for years to come. Emma, thank you for doing that interview.
Thank you, Billi.
And thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Daily Aus. Like Sky said earlier in this episode, if you can press follow on Spotify or Apple, it does really help new audiences find us and get the news from The Daily Aus. We'll be back later today with the evening headlines, but until then, we hope you have a good day.